drop, we can certainly afterwards. But it's my pleasure to kind of welcome you and let you know who's going to be speaking today. So we have Josh Robinson and Stan Novoseletskiy from Microsoft, as well as my colleague Ryan Clark from Tallan. Josh and Stan are both director specialists for data and AI and data and analytics at Microsoft, and they both work in the SLG space. And Ryan is just our expert here at Tallan on the Azure hybrid benefit and the process that we use to make sure everybody gets the most out of the opportunities that they can. So without further ado, I'm going to let Josh take it away. I will say, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. Gina and myself will be monitoring that. We will likely try and hold everything until the end, unless there is something super pressing, in which case we will kind of bug the presenters as it seems fit. So, Josh, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. So imagine that your agency has been running SQL Server for several years, and you've upgraded along the way. Those upgrade projects sometimes are more complex than you might think they would be. So maybe some of you are still running SQL 2012, maybe SQL 2008. Maybe when you deployed your application, your original plan called for high availability, maybe even remote disaster recovery as a stretch goal. But the cost started adding up, complexity started adding up. Maybe the team just didn't have the chance to implement those features. Maybe if they did, they're pretty busy. They don't have time to test them anymore. What about backups? So backups come in handy when something goes wrong, of course, right? But what about ransomware? So it turns out that when your organization is held hostage by ransomware, a backup is the most valuable thing that you can have. And if you don't think ransomware is something that could impact you or your organization, just do a quick search on the internet. And you'll probably find some pretty high profile states and localities. And there's some actively sort of being held hostage right now. And the cost to recover is usually in the millions. What if you are compromised? Are your backups in a safe place, or are they on the same network as your primary databases? Could you restore to any point in time within milliseconds if you had to? You are taking backups, right? Okay. So what about citizens? So citizens expect a lot these days. They expect a lot from their government interactions. And part of the reason for this is that when they interact with their private sector entities like banks or online retailers or social networks, they set the bar pretty high. And so they expect government-run systems to be modern and reliable, whether it's tax day, election day, or just catching the bus next Tuesday. So that's important. And what about cost, right? So we're talking about all these things, but as you grow and as you deploy new systems, the cost goes up and up and up. So what if we had a way to reduce your cost while we're expanding your database capacity? The good news is we have an answer to all these questions. So let's begin with just a quick look at the technology. So we have an amazing version of SQL Server that we call Azure SQL Managed Instance. It was born in the cloud, but it's built on the same SQL Server technology that you guys are already comfortable with, so it has almost 100% compatibility. You can deploy it quickly. You can scale it up or down anytime you need. It handles the important backups from the first minute that you deploy. Patching, well, it's a native cloud application, so it's evergreen. It's always up to date, and your team doesn't even have to worry about that. What about high availability? Well, of course, it's built in. Can't even disable it if you want to. It's just always there. You don't even need to configure it. Disaster recovery, check. In fact, it's literally a checkbox. How about threat protection against things like SQL injection attacks, or that important encryption that you've been meaning to enable for a while now? Both of these are enabled from the first minute you deploy the server. So that's the technology. But what about the cost? All this great stuff must really cost a lot, right? It doesn't. And so I'm going to turn this over to Stan Novoseletskiy, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of those details around cost. Stan?
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone. So as Josh alluded, what we're seeing is the growth of data acquisition and data processing. And that's driven by the digital processes that you guys are doing. You're building new apps, you're expanding existing apps. You're doing more with data. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how to reduce the cost of that processing and storage. So with that, Josh, can you take us to the next slide? Thank you. The Forex cloud bonus is really, really simple. when you take an on-prem SQL enterprise workload and you move it to Azure SQL managed instance, Microsoft will offer you 4 times the number of cores for that workload. That is an entitlement that everyone on this call with an enterprise license has available to them. So what do you do with those extra cores? What do you do with that surplus? Well, we're seeing customers do a couple of different things. We're seeing customers use that surplus to increase their existing database in terms of cores and provide more performance. They're also using the surplus for regional durability by creating replicas in other regions and synchronizing data to those replicas. Incidentally, you can make those other replicas readable and offset the application reporting and analytics towards those replicas. And finally, what we're seeing is some customers actually migrate the data from, sorry. Sorry, guys. Other customers migrate data from alternative databases to SQL managed instance to reduce the cost and maintenance on those alternative platforms. Josh, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is an example of a typical, large but typical government customer. They run 100 cores of SQL Standard and 250 cores of SQL Enterprise. We have a tool that's available to you where you can go and plug in your specific deployment numbers to see those entitlements. But what's important is how those are broken down. So Josh, let's break those numbers down. Thank you. So it's really simple. For every enterprise core, you're entitled 4 cores of SQL managed instance. So that's 250 times 4. Plus every standard core gets a 1-to-1 when you move to a SQL managed instance. And so in total, you're entitled to 1,100 cores, 750 of which are the surplus, right? That's the number of cores that you get as that benefit that are not used by existing deployments. So if you looked at that surplus of 750 cores, what's the monetary value of that? Josh, can you take the slide? Thank you. So if you had to go and purchase those 750 cores from your reseller as your database expands outwards and upwards, you'd have to spend roughly $4.5 million in this case. Again, your situation is probably different. It's larger or smaller, but the concept here is for you to get how this scales. And as your platform expands, you'll be able to draw against that surplus in lieu of purchasing these licenses from reseller. And that's what we have customers do. So instead of spending additional funds on Microsoft SQL Server licensing this year and next year and the following year, you can draw against that surplus to eliminate those purchases. And with that, we'd like to invite our partners from Talan to show you how to actually take advantage of this in your environment. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Josh and Stan, for the good intro on SQL Managed Instance. So that Josh and Stan, they were able to explain to you a lot of the value you can get from actually moving to SQL Managed Instance. So now you're probably wondering, well, how do I even get started with evaluating this, and how can I work with a partner or work with Microsoft? So one thing I will say is that Talan, we've been working very closely with Stan, Josh, other team members to really help customers along. And there's a handful of different funding programs and stuff that we have access to as a Microsoft Gold partner. So we've been able to leverage those and our expertise with doing this to help a lot of customers along the way. So up on the screen, you see here is, we call it our Candyland slide. And this is typically how we kind of approach helping customers start to evaluate. And while today is really focused on the databases, I do want to note that we do focus on the applications as well, because we understand that if you're going to move something to the cloud or move a database to the cloud, there's clearly applications that are tied to that data, and you don't want to create any sort of latency, with having an on-prem application and then a database in the cloud. So everything that you're going to see here today, while it's in the scope of databases, just note that we consider and keep in mind the applications associated with those as well. So really, when we're starting off with a customer in the vision phase, we're doing a bunch of more workshop style engagements to really understand, hey, what are the business drivers for you to move, and what are the key outcomes you want to achieve by moving to SQL managed instance in this case? So what are those key things you really want to achieve, and what's driving it? And then from there, we really move into a road mapping phase. So within the road mapping phase, we're doing more of assessing and helping you assess what you have on premise today, and then what that would look like in the cloud and how you would get it there. And we have a handful of different tools we use that I'll share in a little bit on how that gets us the roadmap we need. And then usually from the roadmap, what we do, because on the roadmap we're prioritizing certain workloads or databases, we take that top priority or the lowest hanging fruit, and we say, hey, let's do an initial proof of value around that. And for that initial proof of value, we're going to create a foundational landing zone in Azure that has, security, governance, compliance, all in mind for the workload or the databases that you want to move. And basically what we do from there is we'll get the customer to move that first set of databases with the corresponding application to really give you that warm and fuzzy feeling that, hey, this is going to work, and here's how it works in the cloud, and we're comfortable, and here's the cost savings that we're realizing. And then typically what we're doing from foundation and proof of value is we're iterating on that roadmap that we made for you. So usually for many customers from that initial assessment, we'll have a big roadmap of things that we want to do ongoing, but picking off that first one and getting the value is very important. And then we'll keep referring back to that roadmap, and that's kind of when we get caught in that loop you see on the screen there of let's move the next set of databases and applications, and then keep iterating until we're all the way through the roadmap. And then when we shoot out the end of this Candyland, what you see is operation or operationalized. So really what we try to do with all of our customers is once you have what we defined you wanted to get to the cloud, how do you operationalize it? How do you use things like Azure Monitor, Application Insights, and a handful of other Azure native tools, as well as maybe third-party tools you're already using to monitor that environment and make sure you're controlling the cost, and everything else that you need to monitor from a CPU perspective and downtime and all that. And then the last thing I'll note is that blue line that you see. So governance is very important from the beginning, but it's something that we ongoingly evaluate with our customers. And then Josh, you want to go ahead to the next slide, share some of the screenshots? Perfect. Yeah, so up here, as I was describing in the beginning, there's a lot of tools that we use to help customers kind of evaluate these sort of things and look at an all-up sort of roadmap. So typically when we kick off an engagement like this, and you have a lot on-prem today and you're looking to move, we'll run an inventorying tool that will get us a bunch of inventory data from what you have on-prem. So that includes all your SQL databases, in many cases, the Windows servers, and so on. And then typically the first question all customers always ask us is, what is this going to cost me? So a lot of people like to evaluate the economics behind it first. So we use tools like Cloud Recon to kind of help us do this. And once we get that inventory data, we kind of lay out these options for you of, here's all the different options that you have from a pricing perspective. And then once you pick the option that fits best for you, here's how it compares to the on-premise cost that you have today. So the cool part about the Recon tool is we've worked with a lot of customers where, you know, if you're able to give us that data, we could plug it in, and the tool itself will actually show you in comparison to your on-premise costs what it would cost in the cloud and what your total savings would be. And the way we get that Azure cost is from that inventory that we initially did. And then going a little bit beyond the TCO, where we start to get into the road mapping stuff, right? So on that Candyland, like you could think of what I just talked about as the vision, like why are you moving? Like what are you looking to achieve? What are the outcomes? Here's the cost saving. And then when we get into the road mapping phase, it's more about what's ready to move. So there's another tool set that we use called Cloud Pilot. And what this tool does a really good job of is helping us understand, okay, I want to get the SQL managed instance. Well, for these 14 databases that we initially selected that we wanted to move, what is the cost? And then if you see on the screen here, there's other things that these tools tell us. So what are the migration blockers? Meaning what are the things that we're going to need to change to actually move these? What are the potential behavioral changes? And then what are any feature parodies that we may run into? So these tools are really powerful in helping us further prioritize the databases and really get to that proof of value state that we saw in the Candyland. And then Josh, if you could go to the next slide. And then the cool part about this, so you saw in the last slide, you could scan in the 14 databases that we initially assessed. But then from there, we could drill into individual ones and get this level of granularity. So if you look on the screen here, it will actually tell you how ready that database is for VMs on Azure or Azure SQL or SQL Managed Instance. So if with many customers, we look at the ones that are the most ready because they're the lowest hanging fruit. And then we could kind of use those as our proof of value. And then one thing I want to mention too, just keeping in mind the applications, of course, is all these screenshots that you saw for databases, these tools do the same thing for the applications. So basically, you know, if we know that these two databases are correlated to this one application, we can look at that application in Cloud Pilot and say, how ready is this application for a lift and shift to VMs? Because maybe we just want to do that first and then get the databases to managed instance. So we could really get a good all-up picture for the customer with these tools, and then that creates that long-term roadmap that we're able to put in front of management and the entire IT group, saying, hey, here's the path forward, and here's how we're going to do it. And then Josh, if you want to advance the slide. Oh, perfect. So in terms of next steps from this webinar, we'd love to chat more with you. I'm sure there's going to be questions. We're moving into the Q&A very soon, so we'd love to answer in this webinar, but certainly would love to connect afterwards and set up some calls, because we understand that all you probably are going to have very different situations. So every customer is very different with how they're licensed for SQL, what they have on-prem, what they have in the cloud. So we'd love to chat more about, you know, how we can start on this journey with you and start with you know, talking with myself and Stan and Josh a little bit more. So I definitely invite you guys to reach out, and of course we'll be reaching out as well. And then, yeah, just to mention in terms of next steps, one of the things that Talan has is, just to plant a seed here, I guess, is our data accelerator. So really you can view this as if you're thinking back to that Candyland, this is kind of where we start on that journey of going through that first leg of the Candyland of let's get the vision, let's get a roadmap, and then let's do a proof of value. And as you can see, there's kind of 3 t-shirt sizes that we do to kind of get an initial set of databases up to the cloud. So would love to connect with you specifically on this offering. And then obviously these can be tailored to specific needs. So
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we're ready for Q&A. I just scanned the chat quickly. Feel free to type in anything any of you have, but I think there were a couple of questions that came in before the meeting. Stan, I know that you mentioned one. So if you want to kick it off, Andrea, just type something in so maybe we can go with her second.
Does anyone have a question that they wanted to ask?
I could go first. This is Michael from DEP, and Ryan, Josh, thank you so much for your presentation, and Stan, you're always awesome as always. Great presentation, folks. Just a quick question. Do I need to migrate all my servers to take advantage of the Forex cloud bonus, Stan, that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The answer is absolutely not, and that's not the intent, because all of the guys and girls on this call, they have on-premise deployments. So everyone has an on-prem data center, and as we're migrating to the cloud, Microsoft has a hybrid cloud approach where we recognize what you have on premise. We want to give you the ability to expand into the cloud, and there's absolutely no requirement to migrate everything. It's not an all or nothing solution. The goal and the intent is really to figure out what are the low-hanging fruit. What portion of your environment do we migrate this year to create enough surplus to eliminate the need to purchase licenses from Microsoft next year? Right, that's really the game. It's you know your footprint's expanding, you know you're building new applications, you know you're collecting and storing data for a longer duration of time. Your database are building new environments every week or every month. The question is, how do we eliminate the need to purchase licenses for those deployments, and how much of the existing footprint do we need to migrate to generate that surplus? And I'll tell you that from the work that we've done with other customers, depending on the rate of expansion, and let me just be honest, every customer is expanding their database footprint. I don't have a single government customer that told me, you know what, we have ceased and deceased building applications, storing or analyzing information. We're going back to paper-based processes. We bought a bunch of pencils for everyone. That's going to be our business model. I haven't had a single conversation like that yet. So the question is, what percentage of the existing footprint do we need to migrate to offset? It's again, just from what we've seen so far, between 5 and 15%. So if you have 100 servers running in your data center today, migrating between 5 and 15 will most likely offset the need to spend any money on purchasing new licenses. I know this was a very long-winded answer, but the question comes up a lot because it's a new topic. Thank you, Michael.
And Stan, I'll just chime in very quickly. So not only do we expect a hybrid environment and there's cost savings, and you kind of can then use the extra cores for whatever you migrate to then expand your footprint in the cloud without spending more. But a lot of times, customers say, hey, we've been running Oracle. We haven't stayed on top of Oracle, just like we're running SQL 08. We're still running, older versions of Oracle, and we've been wanting to get off of it for years. So a lot of times there's low-hanging fruit from a competitor perspective, whether if you're running Esri or some application like that supports both platforms. Well, first of all, SQL Server on-prem is much more cost-effective than Oracle. But guess what? SQL Server in the cloud, managed instance, is even many more times more affordable. So we genuinely see a lot of customers moving those types of workloads, kind of a double hop, or even sometimes directly to managed instance. So it's not just a SQL Server on-prem is the starting point. It's oftentimes more and more often Oracle and other workloads as well. So
Josh, we have a question from Brandon. Did you want to take that, or do you want me to take that? Because this is a very common question, right? A lot of our customers have invested into unlimited virtualization rights. And for those of you that might not be familiar, SQL on-prem has this great benefit where you could license the entire host and deploy as many virtual machines on that host. And I'm assuming, Brandon, that's what you're referring to. So correct me if I'm misreading the question, but the customer does is they basically over allocate. So they can have a 48 core physical host, but they can deploy 300 virtual CPUs onto 120 virtual machines, or in this case, probably 75 virtual machines of their 4 cores each. And they feel, okay, thank you, Brandon. So Josh, do you want to take that, or do you want me to kind of dive into that?
No, go ahead, Stan. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, awesome. So Brandon, great question. A lot of customers have that. We recognize that this is an investment that you've made. You've leveraged this program on-prem. We have entitlement and empowerment to make it right for you. So case by case, customer by customer, we can sit down with you, evaluate your on-prem environment, and do a core multiplication to offset that ratio. So in your case, we'd sit down and figure out, well, how many licenses do you have? How many cores do you have deployed? What would you get from the Forex cloud bonus, to make sure that when you start breaking those apart, you're not going to be in cost negative. We're going to shoot for cost neutral, but we hope to get you into cost positive, because we do want you to take advantage of the Forex cloud bonus and generate that surplus. Okay, Jeff has a question. If we have a SQL server running 2x SQL Standard licenses on-prem, 4-core minimum, do we need additional licenses to run additional SQL on the same server? So, Josh, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer Jeff's question, unless you want me to take it.
So if you have a SQL server running 2x standard on-prem for a 4-core minimum, okay, so two core packs for a total of 4 cores. Do we need additional licenses to run additional instances on the same server? Additional licenses to run additional instances on the same server. So, okay, so basically you're saying, hey, if we install SQL Server one time, can we install in SQL Server, another instance of SQL on that same operating system? I assume that's kind of what you're asking. And if that is what you're asking, the answer is we support up to 50 instances of SQL on a licensed operating system environment. So you can, I don't know what happens when you install 51 and you call support, but technically we support up to 50. So if that's your question, that's the answer. I don't know if there's a clarification. Yeah.
Let me chime in too, and just in case there's a slightly different version of what that question might be intending to ask. And this is Jared, sorry, on the Talan side. So we talked about the 4 times cloud bonus, where enterprise licenses translate to managed instance. 1 enterprise becomes 4. There is a mechanism to move standard licenses 1-to-1 on over to managed instance as well. And it kind of maybe preempting the question that might be asked, because I don't think it's come up yet. Microsoft does give you a grace period too, 6 months, that you can kind of move some of these workloads and have them co-located in the cloud and on-prem as well. So I would mention that.
Okay, and I also want to mention that when you migrate that instance to SQL managed instance, you can run up to 100 database within that instance. So you can actually consolidate from multiple virtual machines into a single managed instance and run larger number of databases to get more out of those cores.
And Jeff sort of has a follow-up question. Do we need to buy more licenses to support the additional licenses? As of right now, the specific workload would not move to Azure. So I guess, and clarification, but it's, in terms of the licenses, it's an either or. You can use them on-prem or you can use them in the cloud. And as Jared kind of pointed out, there's 180-day, there's a 6-month grace period as you migrate from one to the other. That's kind of built in. But if you were, and this may not be your question, but if you were to take existing, 4 existing cores from on-prem and leverage them in Azure, then you would need to purchase others. However, there's also a pay-as-you-go option. So if you said, hey, we do have a new workload, from a cost perspective, it makes a lot of sense. From a admin perspective, it makes a lot of sense to run it in Azure. We just don't have extra licenses lying around, or we need to consolidate or free up licenses. You can run pay as you go in the short term, and then kind of plan for a enabling of that hybrid use benefit down the road. So that's an option. And I may have answered a different question what you were asking, but
and we can always follow up. and
For
make
sure.
it specific. Okay, Jim had a question. Jim with corrections, address the support model, communication channels for system problems between devs, DBAs, MS Cloud. Okay, great question. So this is more of an Azure question rather than a database specific question, but Jared, do you, do you want to chime in on what customers do when they need help within Azure, and then we can talk about unified support and Premier on our side.
Yeah, so I mean, we have some kind of models where we help customers in a number of different ways. One of them is we're a cloud solution provider for Microsoft. So in the case where we're hosting workloads for customers, we actually provide that white glove treatment from a support perspective. And we obviously have the ability, because we maintain our own Premier support, to go back to Microsoft and open tickets on your behalf. For many of you with your enterprise agreements in place, you likely have software assurance and some of those mechanisms as well. So I'll hand it to Stan in a second to talk a little bit more about the Microsoft support. But when we help customers make some of these moves, and there's a lot of hesitation sometimes, very unfamiliar with some of the Azure intricacies, developers, DBAs, part of our engagement model is to educate you as we're helping you move some of these workloads. Because like you said, there's the databases which are a little bit more familiar, comfortable for folks, but some of the Azure networking governance mechanisms are a little bit more unfamiliar, and we can certainly help kind of achieve that. So Stan, did you want to talk about the Microsoft support?
Yeah, so there's two sides of it, and I'm sharing my screen just for reference. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Hold on a second. But
Hasn't come through yet.
Within the Azure portal, every service has this little button that says new support request. And as long as you're in Azure, and obviously you would be, you can click this button and it's going to kick off a request with our engineering teams. This is at no additional cost to you guys. And it works really, really well because we've seen customers run into technical issues and they would just create a request and somebody from Microsoft will reach out to them and work with them through that ticket. Additionally, if you are a customer that has Premier support or what we now call unified support, you have a dedicated technical account manager, even though the new terminology for that is Client Success Account Manager, CSAM, but it's basically the same role, where they would also stay on top of this and maybe bring in resources locally as needed. So that's your holistic support structure. And I have to be honest with you, because Azure is 24/7, 365, there's a lot of support engineers, and these problems get addressed very, very quickly, much faster than what we've seen on-prem when customers run into Sev A or Sev B issues. Jim, I hope that answers your question. Yep, okay, awesome. Anyone else?
I don't see anything else in the chat now. And I know one more. What is the turnaround time to receive this meeting's recording via email? I wish to pass this information along. So perfect. You're making that intro right for me. So thank you, Pamela. I think being that we're a little bit over, we're going to probably end it now. We will be downloading the recording. It usually takes, depending on the time, 15 or so minutes. And we typically try to get the webinar out the same day. If not, worst case scenario, it'll be first thing tomorrow morning. And we'll make it accessible so that you guys can send it to all of your colleagues that may have questions. We will add the LinkedIn information for all of our presenters. And then we'll certainly be in touch following up because I know everyone's situation is going to be a little bit different on this. So it's a great opportunity to take advantage of. Like Stan said, you are all entitled to some level of benefit here. So thank you again for your time today, everyone. We look forward to talking to you. Jared, did you raise your hand on purpose?
I did. I did want to just mention, you saw some of the tools that Ryan shared today. If you have questions that weren't covered in the recording, you feel free to reach out. We're happy to walk through your very specific scenario. And the tools, as I mentioned, that Ryan was sharing, Microsoft actually has opportunities to purchase those tools on your behalf to do some of these assessments. So take advantage of that for sure. You know, and you know, we can kind of help guide you through, you know, that process with them.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jared. I was just gonna say, just to echo what he said, like some of the screen shares I shared were, I mean, limited. Like the tool has well beyond that. Like, and like I said, it goes even into the application side, and we'd be happy to do demos, you know, for you of it if you're interested in that as well. Definitely a great tool, and it's helped us a lot with our assessments of customers.
So here's the point. We're talking about databases today, and sort of the unspoken is applications to go with them, right? But if you run this tool, it's the year 2020. If you're already thinking about moving to the cloud, or you're not yet, but you wish you were, this is a great sort of starting point for that. You kind of get an assessment of your entire environment that happens to have the databases and applications and everything else, VMs. So yeah, so take advantage of it. We're happy to kind of work to sponsor that and work with a great partner like Talan to make that happen. So it's a great opportunity.
Thanks everyone so much for your time. Have a great rest of your week, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.